Mushroom Wonderland.
Hey, what's going on everybody? This is Aaron Hilliard from Mushroom Wonderland. Welcome to the channel. If you're brand new, what we talk about here is mainly wild mushrooms, but we talk about mushroom cultivation, mushroom festivals, pretty much anything that has to do with mushrooms. So I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and definitely like videos like this, give it that thumbs up. But let me introduce myself. My name is Aaron Hilliard. I am the creator of Mushroom Wonderland. I've been a mushroom geek for like 30 years, ever since I was a kid, and my grandma got me into mushrooms. I started learning about them, trying to learn to identify them. And I've become the vice president of the local mycological society. And I'm just immersed in the mushroom world. And so it's really, really fun. And there's quite a community of people out here. So if you have a thing in you that really is interested in fungus, then you're a mycophile. That's what we call people like us. And you have found your community here at Mushroom Wonderland, so welcome. So today is actually the day of the annual mushroom show for our mushroom club. It's held at Olympic College in Bremerton, Washington. I'm right here on the Kitsap Peninsula of Washington State, down in the Puget Sound Basin. So basically at sea level. And I went out yesterday to forage mushrooms for the show to put out on the display tables for everybody, for the general public to come look at. And so these are the mushrooms that I came up with yesterday. It's been a very untypical year. We had like a crazy drought and hot, dry, long summer that went all the way, almost to the end of October. Here it is November, going into the second week of November, and we're finally starting to see mushrooms popping up, but still not in the numbers that are typical. The conifer forest where I typically go mushroom foraging would be carpeted with Rusula mushrooms right now, and they're very sparse, but there are definitely mushrooms out there. So on this video here today, I'm going to be looking at all these mushrooms in front of me. I'm going to describe what they are to you and what their uses are, and help to demystify some of these fungus right here in the setting of my own home. Typically I'm out in the woods and I'm making videos as I'm walking, so this is a little bit different. But I still think it could be very useful information if you're into identification of mushrooms. I started identifying mushrooms in field guides that I got from my grandma when I was a kid. Then I found myself in the library as a teenager just reading mushroom books, trying to piece together these crazy Latin scientific names of the mushrooms. And then after joining on to the internet about 5 years ago and joining in with the Mycological Society, I've just learned a ton more about mushrooms. And so there's a lot of cool uses and a lot of cool facts about a lot of these mushrooms. So let's get right into it. As you can see, I got 4 different flats of all kinds of different wild mushrooms. Some of them edible, some of them not. Some of them are poisonous, and so we're going to go over all of these. I'm going to push these to the side, and we're just going to start with the first flat here. And if you look at this, I got a big pile of these mushrooms, and so these are all the same kind of mushroom, even though they take on different features. Look at this guy, is like short and fat and stout, and then this guy is kind of taller with a skinnier stem, big cap, kind of brown color. These ones are tall and slender stem with the brown cap. This one's much darker, but they're the same species of mushroom. So, mushrooms of the same species can share the same morphological features within a range. So, short and fat, tall and skinny, these all fit within the typical range of this particular mushroom. These ones were foraged from a parking lot island at the local Home Depot in Gig Harbor, Washington. And so these are a pretty common mushroom, and they are what we call a mycorrhizal mushroom. So these have an association with trees. They will not grow without a certain tree. And these ones are commonly known as the birch bolete, the scientific name being Lexinum scabrum, or somewhere close to that. So one thing you'll notice about these mushrooms is that the stalk, or the stipe, we call the stem the stipe, it's got all these little brown to black little like hairs on it, and those are called scabers, and some people call this the scaber stalk bolete. And what makes it a bolete is that it's got this spongy surface underneath here. So some mushrooms will have gills. You look at that one, see it's got gills underneath there, and this one has got a sponge surface. So these are both spore dispersal units. The spores are grown in what's called basidia on these little gills, which the scientific name of those is lameliae. I don't want to confuse you too much. We're going to keep it kind of basic on this video, but these are called pores. So if you look really close, or if you have a jeweler's loupe or a hand lens, you can really see all these tiny little holes right here. And inside those holes is the same mechanism that produces spores, and then the spores fall out of those holes and catch into the wind, and they can, you know, a mushroom like this will produce, you know, millions of spores. So they're microscopic, and it's really interesting to look at them under a microscope, and you can tell just by looking at some spores what genus and species of mushrooms they are. But anyways, the Lexinum scabrum, or the birch bolete, this one actually at the college during the show, the kitchen staff there will cook these up and make a bisque out of birch boletes, which is kind of like a soup, and serve it in small amounts to the general public. One thing about these mushrooms is that they can cause gastrointestinal upset. So be careful when eating these. Just like with any wild mushroom that you're unfamiliar with, start with a small amount to make sure that it's not going to really upset your stomach too much, and then go up from there, you know. And but a small sample size cup of birch bolete bisque is probably safe for anybody. Although I have an adverse reaction to other mushrooms that even a tablespoon of them will usually send me to the bathroom. So anyways, this one, you know, in Europe they love to pick these Lexinums. There's a relative that associates with aspen out in the middle of the country, but these birch boletes can be found everywhere, often growing in public places with birch trees. And it's just interesting that they're so picky. They just do not grow with any other tree besides birch. So there you go, the Lexinum scabrum, or the birch bolete. So now we're going to move on to these ones that I showed you a minute ago that do have these gills rather than the pores underneath here. And this is a type of what we call a milk cap, milky cap. So these are in the genus Lactarius. And Lactarius, the root word of that being lactate, right? Because they actually produce milk. And one way you can tell is if you cut the gills right here, a little bit of whitish secretion will come out of them. And these two were found right underneath the same birch trees growing in a public setting. So this is known as the Downy Milk Cap, or Lactarius pubescens, because it has this really kind of furry top on the caps. These ones are okay to eat, but people aren't known for eating them. They also like to grow in places where they accumulate heavy metals and toxins from the parking lot and stuff like that. So, you know, if you keep in mind, if you're picking these out of heavily fertilized grass or something, probably avoid eating those, you know. So the Downy Milk Cap, or Lactarius pubescens, will excrete this white milky stuff from underneath the cap, and you can see how the cap kind of like fans upward, so you can really see the gills. And so these are dispersing millions of spores each, and they've got a really kind of brittle, fragile structure to them. So the Downy Milk Cap, Lactarius pubescens. Pubescens in Latin, there's a lot of like funny, like weird sexual names and stuff in mycology. And pubescens, if you look it up, it means coming of age or hairy, you know. So basically, you know, pubes gets their name from the Latin word pubescens. So this is the pubi lactarius, if you will. So anyways, kind of a cool mushroom, and I'm always excited to see a Lactarius because it's really fun when you take a knife and you just lightly score the gills, and you'll see that milky secretion come out. And you can differentiate a lot of different species of Lactarius just by doing that test, cutting the gills, and seeing what color the lactation is. So these are generally a safe genus of mushrooms, no deadly Lactarius, but some of them are very peppery and acrid and pretty much inedible for that reason. But none of them are going to do any more than give you a little bit of an upset stomach if you eat the wrong one. But these ones would be fine to eat, provided you found them in a place that was, you know, not getting motor oil and gas and all this kind of stuff spilled on it. So Lactarius pubescens. So right here, I've got a little cluster of mushrooms, and these are pretty fragile. I'm gonna go slow. Ooh, you see what got on my finger? this black ink. So these are known as an Inky Cap, and you can see it's almost like dripping off the edge right there. These did not look like this yesterday. And I'll superimpose a picture up here of what they look like in their habitat, or in situ as we call it in scientific language. But these are known as Coprinopsis atramentaria, or the alcohol Inky Cap. And something interesting about these, besides their morphology, you know, let's talk about the morphology a little bit. You can see how it's dripping and turning into this black goo. And they literally just deliquesce into ink. They just kind of melt into ink. And this black inky stuff is full of spores. It's full of Coprinopsis spores, so they're gonna drip spores all over the ground. Wildlife picks them up and whatnot. This ink was actually used in World War II to write secret messages, and to confirm that the message actually came from the source, from where it was supposed to come from. They could use microscopy and look at the writing on the paper and see the spores in the ink, and they would know that it was actually the right person who sent it. So very cool kind of, you know, secret little lore about these mushrooms. But they will turn to black ink within the next day or two, so I'm gonna hurry up, try to get these to the show. Having them indoors here in this warm 70-degree setting, not good for them. They're just they're wasting away. So if you can keep them colder, it's going to slow down the process, and you can actually store them in water, which will completely stop this deliquescing process. These are edible, but the interesting thing is that if you were to eat these and they taste delicious and everything, you know, before they turn into black ink, you could eat these. But if you were to drink alcohol within a week after eating these, you're going to get violently ill. And so it's the same chemical reaction that happens in a drug called anabuse that they give to really bad alcoholics to try to stop them from consuming alcohol. So coprine is a very volatile chemical when mixed with alcohol. So you can eat these all the way up to the point when you drink alcohol and you're fine. But if you eat these and then take some drinks of alcohol, it's going to make you sick. So, you know, I still probably would just avoid eating these ones just because they have such a strange reaction. I don't really want to play with fire when it comes to getting sick from eating mushrooms, but they're beautiful. They grow off of dead wood, often usually rotten roots of an old stump or something. So Coprinopsis atramentaria, or the alcohol Inky Cap. Kind of a cool one here. Right here in the corner of this tray, I have these little brown mushrooms, LBMs we call them. These ones are a pretty light buff color, and I can see this kind of silky looking fibers radiating out from the center out towards the edge of the cap. So this would put this in a genus called Inocybe. They're gonna have a brown spore print, but I'm not sure exactly of the species, but this particular genus of mushrooms is known to have a lot of poisonous mushrooms in it. So the Inocybe, a mycorrhizal mushroom, again, they grow with trees. In fact, all these mushrooms except for the Inky Caps, these are known as saprobes, so they'll just grow on decaying matter. The rest of these mushrooms, including Lactarius, the birch boletes, and these Inocybe, they all need trees to grow, and these particular ones like the conifer trees. So they're called a Silky Cap or a silk cap, and typically containing, some muscarine, which is a pretty poisonous substance, and so best to leave this genus of mushrooms alone. I'm going to take these over. My friend Jack Johnson and Lauren Ray, they're going to help me to identify these down to a species level. I'm not exactly sure what species these are. There's a lot of Inocybe mushrooms that grow around here, but a very common one that litters the conifer forest floor in the Northwest is this genus, Inocybe. So let's move on to the next flat. And these ones, everybody wants to talk about these. Look at how beautiful these guys are. Red with the white spots. This is, very iconic mushroom, probably the most familiar mushroom in the world. If you ask a kid to draw a mushroom, this is what they're gonna draw, like 100% of the time. And if you ask an adult to draw a mushroom, they're gonna draw this mushroom. They're in video games, Mario Brothers, right? This mushroom is, all over t-shirts and cute little, mushroom clothing and whatnot. A lot of times when people talk about magic mushrooms, this mushroom will be pictured there. And so, but if you look in any field guide, any modern field guide is going to tell you that this mushroom is actually toxic because it does contain a compound known as muscarine, which can make you very sick. It'll affect your gastrointestinal system, make you vomit, make you have diarrhea and bad intestinal cramping. But aside from that, it also contains a couple of compounds known as iobotanic acid and muscimol. And these two chemicals work together to create kind of a dissociative deliriant effect. So they are considered a psychotropic or a mind-altering mushroom, although they're not illegal, and for a reason, because it is so unpleasant that most people will never ever want to try that again. It puts you in a state that's kind of like drunkenness and sleepiness. You know, there's old folklore that perhaps when the Vikings went to pillage a land, that they would eat these first and become crazy warriors. But you know, this is a depressant, so it's kind of hard to believe that they went into battle after eating these. It kind of makes you want to lay down and go to sleep and have horrible dreams. Maybe after having some diarrhea and throwing up a couple of times. So there's a way to detoxify these and eat them safely as an edible mushroom, and they're said to be really delicious. And they also, I know a guy who just eats these just like this, you know, slice it up and saute it in a pan. He says they're really good. It's up to you, but you know, truth be told, all the field guides are going to call this mushroom toxic. So I just treat it as such, and I'm not really interested in trying the effects of it. I've read enough about it that, you know, and I've talked to people who have taken it, and nobody says that they really love it. But this one is called Amanita muscaria. So the one that grows here in the Northwest, the native one, we call Amanita muscaria variety flavivulvata. There's different varieties of this mushroom. There's a lot of contention right now as to whether it should even be called Amanita muscaria, because that's actually a European taxonomy. This one was named early in the 1900s by a different mycologist as Amanita chrysoblema, and so some mycologists are saying that it should go back to that name and stop calling it Amanita muscaria, that we should call this Amanita chrysoblema. Either way, it's going to have white spores, white gills. The gills do not attach to the stem, so they call these free gills, and it usually has this beautiful veil, even though these kind of dried up and that veil seems to disappear. And it's got this bulbous base that it comes out of called a vulva, and so it's kind of like an egg, and as it erupts out of that egg, it leaves little chunks of that egg on top of the cap, and this gives it its most obvious characteristic morphology is the red, bright red cap with the white speckles all over it. These white spots can easily peel off or get washed off in the rain, and they're no more poisonous than the rest of the mushroom, but it is said that the highest concentrations of the iobotanic acid and the muscimol is just under the surface of this red cap layer. So, you know, it's up to you if you want to try to see what these hold, but the verdict of the ages is that they're toxic. So Amanita muscaria variety flavivulvata or Amanita chrysoblema could work too if you want to, like, you know, kind of jostle things up a little bit. Right here, I found these ones growing in wood chips. Oh, by the way, these are also mycorrhizal. These will also be growing in association with conifer trees here in the Northwest. These ones were actually growing with imported aspen trees. So there's a chance that these are not native Amanita muscaria, that these are potentially actually the European variety. These don't have a lot of yellow down here or yellow on the spots on the cap. So these could very well be the actual European variety that came with the trees that were planted at the courthouse near my house. Right here we've got another mycorrhizal mushroom. This one's super beautiful. It's very purple and it's got a really fuzzy cap. We call that tomentos. So it's got a lot of fuzz on the cap, and then underneath it's gonna have gills, and in the gills you see this kind of orangish color, and this is the color of the spores are actually an orange color. This is known as a Cortinarius violaceus, or the violet web cap. They call it a web cap, and it's also in the genus Cortinarius because it has a thing called a cortina, which is like thread-like, you know, hyphal threads that connect the edge of the cap to the stem here. And as it opens up, that cortina will protect the gills until the spores are ready to be dispersed. And then the cortina tears away and it leaves this fuzziness hanging off the edge of the cap. And then the spores fall on the stem, on the rest of the cortina, turns bright orange. And it's easy to identify that it's in the genus Cortinarius, which is a huge genus of mushrooms, and it's been divided into a whole bunch of other subgenuses, so a tough one to keep up with. But this one, Cortinarius violaceus, very violet, very vibrant, one of my favorite mushrooms to find in the woods. This is an edible mushroom, but it's honestly, it's kind of so rare and you find so few of them. This one was found growing singularly alone in the needle duff in a conifer forest. So, you know, I don't have a desire to eat this. And Cortinarius does contain a lot of mushrooms that are poisonous. So, you know, I don't know, it's just a really pretty one to look at, really photogenic. I've taken some awesome photos of these, some of my favorite mushrooms to photograph. So Cortinarius violaceus, or the violet webcap. Right here, I've got another variety of Inky Cap. Oh, and this just wants to fall apart. It's sad. This one's called the Shaggy Mane. So this is a pretty popular edible, wild edible mushroom. Once it starts to deliquesce into this ink, like the Coprinopsis, you know, then it's no good to eat anymore. It turns into black ink. You see that on my finger? It's nasty. But these are Coprinus comatus. So this is the genus type of Coprinus, meaning that this mushroom represents the entire genus, and anything else in the genus is going to have to match the features of this mushroom. And so it's actually in a different genus than the alcohol Inky Cap was known as Coprinopsis. This one's Coprinus. And they used to all be in like one big group, but they've been split apart. And so this is a good edible mushroom known as the Shaggy Mane. It gets these little fibrils, these little curled up scales all over the cap. And when they're young, they're really white and they can grow in big clusters, and they like to grow in lawns and pastures and on the edges of meadows and in gravel and driveways. They really seem to like disturbed areas where human activity is happening. So a good one, but they also do like to grow in places where dogs pee a lot. So be mindful of that when you're picking, if you come across a big patch of Shaggy Manes. What could have possibly been there, you know, peeing in that area or whatever. They like to grow in the disturbed areas along the beginning of a trail, and that's often where dogs like to do their business. So be careful of that. But these just don't last long. So when you pick them, hurry up and eat them that day. Or again, you could put it in water to preserve it. But these ones are turned into ink quickly, so I'm going to try to get these over to the college. This actually has a little rock attached to the mycelium down here. So it was growing in gravel. They love growing in gravel like that. They just burst up through the gravel. And for being such a fragile mushroom, I've actually seen these busting through asphalt. So it's just crazy how strong these mushrooms can be for how brittle they really are. And huge spore producers. So very cool mushrooms. Oh gosh, gotta be gentle with those. Right here we've got a cool mushroom. This one is known as the Russula brevipes, or the short-footed Russula. So see how it's got this short stem for you know, comparatively how big that cap is. And it's got this depression in the center of the cap. A lot of mushrooms are umbonate, so they'll have a pointy top to the cap. This one is more kind of vase-shaped or funnel-shaped. And it's got these white gills, and it's very, very plain and indistinct, very boring mushroom. David Aurora, in his book, Mushrooms Demystified, calls this the most boring mushroom in the forest. It is boring until it has a parasite attack it, and then it becomes this. So this is the same mushroom, this one Russula brevipes, in its regular form, and it becomes the host of a parasite right here. And I'm going to talk about these in just a second. But this mushroom on its own, Russula brevipes, is a decent edible mushroom. People here in America really don't eat them, but in Russia they like to pickle these, and in you know, Northern Europe and Asia they eat these like crazy. So you know, you could definitely eat these. They're very abundant here in the Northwest. One of the first mushrooms I learned to identify, and it's really safe and just boring and plain and kind of flavorless, but you could definitely eat this. This is another in the same genus Russula. This is a bigger one. Look at that. Very striated cap. You know, it's got these striations, which mean lines at the edge of the cap gill. Look at this big lumpy stem. So, and this one's got a very nice almond scent. This one's known as Russula fragrantissima. So the fragrant Russula, or the almond scented Russula. And there's a big group of these that grow in the same place every year. Again, a mycorrhizal mushroom. So this mycelium is living in association with the roots of a big conifer tree, and they grow up into these big, huge mushrooms. Not very attractive mushroom until you smell it. Man, it's got this very, very amaretto, sweet kind of almond extract smell. A lot like some agaricus mushrooms, like Agaricus augustus, the prince. Cool, this one's beautiful, and I'm happy to have found this to put on the table there, and hopefully people will pick it up and get a good smell of it. It's really amazing. For such an ugly mushroom, what a beautiful scent. So that kind of does it for that tray there. Moving on to the next tray. All right, so this tray is containing some really awesome mushrooms, some really popular wild edible mushrooms. So now let's talk about this one, this bright orange thing that I just showed you a second ago. So it starts out like this, a Russula brevipees. It becomes parasitized, and I'm not sure if this happens underground or to the fruiting body itself. There's a little bit of mystery about that, so it's kind of exciting. The world of mycology is ever evolving and we're learning new things, but when it gets parasitized, it turns it orange like this. It completely engulfs the gills, so no longer are there gills underneath there. It's just kind of a smooth surface, and it's bright orange. It has all these little kind of speckles on it, and there's whiter spots and stuff. It gets very contorted, so it does have a tendency to hold on to a lot of needle duff and stuff like that. But this is known as Hypomyces lactiflorum, or the lobster mushroom. So these ones sell for $39.95 a. So you can find these mushrooms at Pike Place Market in Seattle going for $39.95 a pound. Another, this is a mycorrhizal mushroom that's been attacked by a parasite. So it turned these Russula brevipees, this real boring looking mushroom, into these beautifully vibrant and sometimes difficult to find mushrooms because they're so contorted. Often they don't make it up above the level of the moss. Luckily I found this nice little group of them to take to the show today. They also make for a really nice dyeing mushroom, so you can dye fabric with these, and it turns it a very beautiful, vibrant kind of red, orange to purple color depending on mordants that you add in, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But the lobster mushroom, Hypomyces lactiflorum, a very strange relationship between a parasite, a fungus, and its host tree. So you got quite a relationship trifecta going on here with the Russula brevipees to the Hypomyces lactiflorum, or the lobster mushroom. Beautiful, good edible mushroom, good dyeing mushroom. Right here, another super popular wild edible mushroom, the Pacific golden chanterelle. So chanterelle, the Cantharellus formosus is its scientific Latin name. These are beautiful and they smell good. Some people say they smell like apricots. I've heard, some species of these really smell like apricots. I think that it has a lot to do with kind of a mind, like association thing, because you see this color and they look like the color of apricots. But these are a good and very popular wild edible mushroom, but they're not for everybody. They personally make me sick when I eat them. I just get really bad indigestion. So I can't eat these anymore. I ate them for like 20 years, and then one year all of a sudden I just can't eat them anymore. And I hear other people have that same kind of experience, but some of the young ones look just like a beautiful little flower, and you can see the gills kind of run down the stem, so they run to current. That's a really easy identifying feature. They have this really wavy kind of look to the cap, always kind of vase shape and depressed in the middle. Some of them have a very strange morphology, like this guy right here. It's more umbonate, but more than that, it's got all these crazy wrinkles and knobs and little nodules all over the cap. So this is called a rose cone mutation. Not exactly sure what causes that, but it's harmless and you can eat this just the same. But this is the Cantharellus formosus, formosus meaning beautiful. So the beautiful chanterelle. There's a lot of different species of this mushroom, but this particular one, the formosus, grows exclusively here in the PNW, and is a lot of people's favorite. And it's a good one to start with because it's easy to identify and pretty unmistakable, and they're good eating for those who can eat them. Right here, probably the first mushroom I ever really, this was the first mushroom I ever identified and really ate with the help of my grandma. This one, after she passed away, I found some of these, and this was the first mushroom that I ever experimented with, and I researched it in books, and I was nervous. I sliced it up and I cooked it and I ate it, and it turns out to be one of my favorite wild edible mushrooms, and we call this one the Shaggy Parasol. So we have the shaggy manes over here. These are the Shaggy Parasol, and you can see the scaling on the cap. That's why it gets that name, Shaggy. It's got this ring down here, and the ring, you can actually slide it up and down on the stem, although they're kind of fragile and it might break away. So I'm gonna not do that today because I just wanna leave it so that people can see that feature at the show. But another one of the features is if you break the stem of this, it's gonna bruise really bright orange. And so those are a couple of the indicators of this delicious wild edible mushroom. I don't eat the stem, I just pop the cap off. Tastes just like a portobello or something, but with a little more flavor. And a delicious one to saute up and have on a steak or something like that. Chlorophyllum oliverii is the scientific name of this one. And it has a few relatives. It has one poisonous look-alike that actually doesn't occur right here in the Puget Sound Basin, but it's known to occur in southern Washington and Oregon and California and pretty much the rest of the country, known as a Chlorophyllum molybdites. And it's got a green spore print. This one's gonna have a white spore print. So, you know, the molybdites, a much whiter cap with just a very small dark center of the disc, and it's got some patches of darkness, but Chlorophyllum oliverii looks a lot like Chlorophyllum molybdites. So you can hear my dog Gunner back there. If you're a fan of the channel, you know Gunner. He's in here just relaxing on this nice rainy Sunday morning. But yeah, the Shaggy Parasol, definitely one of my favorite edible mushrooms. And I might take these back from the show. Sometimes they grow in huge troops. Well, there'll be hundreds of these things. We only found 3 of them yesterday, so I would like to have these with dinner, but for the sake of the people at the show, I'm going to take them in there and show them off instead. Right here, I've got a little pine cone with little mushrooms growing all over it. This actually isn't a pine cone, it's a fir cone, and so these are known as the Furcone mushroom. The Strobilurus trulisatus, or the Furcone mushroom, got a little yellow stem, little white cap with white gills, very fragile little mushrooms. These ones didn't survive overnight all that well, but a beautiful little mushroom. And these are a sign that all the other mushrooms are coming soon. These seem to be the first ones to really flush in the mycorrhizal conifer forest setting. So whenever I see the pine cones, I keep saying that because it's such a generic term. Whenever I see the fir cones really start popping with these little white mushrooms, the Strobilurus, I know that all of the other good wild edible mycorrhizal mushrooms are about to start popping up too. Right here I've got what we know as a tree conch. Very hard mushrooms. So these are growing on dead wood, dead logs, dead snags, dead trees, you know. And these are pretty difficult to get off of a tree. Luckily I found a log with it down and I was able to kick one off, kick off a couple of them. This one, yikes, this one is old and dead. This one is younger and alive still, and you can see it's red, and then it's got this belt around the edge, so it gets the common name, the red belted conch. And this one, the scientific name is Phomitopsis mountziae. Used to be called Phomitopsis panicola, and that is the European taxonomy. Recent DNA studies have shown that this is actually a different mushroom than the panicola. So it gets its own name after a mycologist called Mountziae, and some people use it like a medicinal mushroom and make a tea out of it. I've heard of somebody drinking like 10 or 11 cups of this tea and having kind of an out-of-body experience. I've never experienced that myself, but perhaps it could fall under the umbrella of mind-altering substance. But when you have to drink 10 or 11 cups of anything, that's a lot of liquid, man. Maybe you were just like so hydrated that it was making you hallucinate or something. I don't know. Put it in the comments if you've had experience, you know, drinking a lot of red belted conch tea and like feeling that weightlessness and a little bit of like a body high or whatever. But this is a super important mushroom for ecology. It breaks down all of the cellulose in the dead logs, so when a tree falls over, these mushrooms attack it, you know, usually first thing, and they start to eat all of the white cellulose out of the wood, and they just leave behind all the brown wood, which just falls apart then and turns back into more soil for trees and plants to grow in. So it's known as a brown rot decayer. Super duper common mushroom, probably the most common mushroom in the PNW. You walk into any forest and you're going to see these growing on a stump or a log or a tree. The Phomitopsis mountziae, or the red-belted conch. It's easy to remember, red-belted conch. And they have a lot of different kind of morphological features. Some of them look different than others. Some of them look quite different than others. But very important to the ecology of the forest around here. So look at this cool little end of a log. And it's got these beautiful mushrooms growing right here on it. This one is known as the turkey tail, and you can see why. It looks a lot like a cartoon turkey tail. Trametes versicolor, because they can come in so many different colors. The scientific name is actually versicolor, means variety of colors. And it's got concentric rings of these different colors that go out to the edge. And then underneath it's going to have pores, you know, another pore surface, just like the red-belted conch. and the Punctiphorelis. This one is, you know, very, very common and the most studied medicinal mushroom in the world. Always growing on a hardwood log like this. This is a chunk of maple right here, and I was able to just get the end of the log, and I've heard it said that the darker the fruiting body, the more medicinal powers it has. So kind of a cool one. It's always fun to find, real easy to identify and super common, and you can grind this up, make it into tea or a tincture or some kind of maybe hot chocolate, and ingest it for its antibacterial, antiviral, antioxidant properties. You know, this is supposed to even, you know, work as maybe a cure for cancer. So kind of a cool one there. These ones looking pretty rough, man, but these like to grow in these big clusters on trees, on dead trees and stumps, and you can see this really dark color on some of the caps. That's actually the spores that fell off of the other one. So these are making 1 million spores right now, and these are known as the Sulfur Tuft, and these actually grow with a black light. They glow really, and you can kind of see the glowiness, you know, but they're so spored out that the glow is really not very bright anymore. But if you go out at night with a flashlight like this and you shine it off into the forest, you can see these from 100 feet away. They're so bright. And these are also poisonous. And look at this big cespitose grouping of them, big clusters of them. And really pretty mushroom when they're younger. These are pretty ugly right here. Hypholoma fasciculare, or the sulfur tuft. So poisonous mushroom, not deadly, but definitely causes GI. So cool mushroom to look at under the black light. Definitely one that you want to leave behind when it comes to culinary stuff. Right here I have a cool mushroom that also likes to grow off of dead wood. Sometimes it actually kills trees, and so this one is another dyer's mushroom. I talked about dyeing fabric with those lobster mushrooms. This one is actually called the Dyers Polypore because it's good for dyeing fabric. And you can color clothing. Back in the old days, you know, you'd get some cotton or silk or usually wool, and you wanted your wool shirt to be like yellow or brown or green. This one, the Dyers Polypore, Phaeolus schweinetzii, would be a good one to boil that fabric with, and it would actually take the colors and pigments from the mushroom, transfer it into the wool, and give you pretty colors. So really cool mushroom. Tons of these growing out there this year. It looks kind of like a pastry or something to me when they're young like this, but they can grow big and woody, and honestly the bigger and more mature they are, the more desirable they are to the dyeing community, from what I understand. So not one to be eaten. It would be like eating a chunk of wood or something, but I don't think it's toxic. Just would not even consider eating something like that. Just because you can eat something doesn't mean you should. So edibility, not always a factor. I mean, you can just judge by looking at this mushroom. Yeah, I don't want to eat that. You know what I mean? There's plenty of good stuff out here to eat. And then right here, you know, kind of the finale are these awesome little earth stars. So it's a type of a puffball, but it grows this crazy this encasement that when it opens up, it actually curls underneath and it detaches this mushroom from the soil that it's growing in, and then it can blow around in the wind. You see the bottom of that? How crazy is that? So I found these, sometimes they're growing solitarily. I found 3 of these growing near each other in a conifer woods setting, but they're definitely a saprotroph, so they don't need a tree to grow with, but they do like that kind of habitat. So the earth star, or gastriales, this one is always one of my favorite ones to find. And it's got a spore dispersal unit. When you tap this, you see that little puff of spores. I just released, you know, hundreds of thousands of spores into my dining room here, so, but that's fine. So very cool earth stars. So again, thank you for joining. Very happy to have you here on the channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Much love, everyone. Peace out.